Leadership doesn't start with your title. Leadership starts with your habits, the small daily choices that we make that shapes us into the kind of leader that we want to become. Today, we're going to look at 5 habits every godly leader must develop if they want to lead with faith, integrity, and impact on Called to Lead. Hello and welcome again to the Called to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Colby Rich. I want to thank you for joining today. We're going to look at habits that help us to be godly leaders. And, I've been a youth minister for a long time. I started youth ministry 23 years ago and took a few years off here in the middle of my ministry experience, but to do other ministry stuff and didn't work with teenagers. But it seems like over and over again, the topic comes up about habits. Do you have good habits? Do you have bad habits? And we talk a lot about bad habits. We talk a lot about the things that we do that are wrong, the things that we do that waste time, that don't make us better, that don't help us in life. But sometimes we don't focus too much on good habits, maybe not as much as we should. And so today we're going to look at some good habits that we need to develop if we want to be godly leaders. The first habit is this: daily surrender to God. In Luke 9:23, Jesus says that if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Well, what does taking up your cross even mean? I know a lot of people will say, I have this health problem, and that's my cross to bear. Or they'll say, I've got this other problem. It's my responsibility to deal with. That's my cross to bear. And some people may say, this coworker or these in-laws or whatever it is, that's my cross to bear. But really, that's not your cross, at least not the way Jesus is talking about. Because think about in Roman culture, what a cross meant. It meant death. I mean, it meant the absolute worst death for the absolute worst person, the worst criminal. And the Romans invented this. They would drive spikes through your hand, or some people think that it was the wrist right here. So when you pulled on the nail, it wouldn't rip through your hand. It would keep you on the cross, and another nail through your feet, and you would literally suffocate to death. And if you didn't do it fast enough for them, they would break your legs so that you would suffocate faster. I remember reading one time that it was probably, some doctors said it's probably the most brutal and excruciating form of death ever devised by a government. And we know governments have figured out all kinds of ways to make us feel pain and to punish us or whatever else, but this is like the most brutal. And the cool thing is, even in the Old Testament, some of the prophecies about the Messiah would say that he would hang on a tree, but no bones would be broken. Well, think about that. What they're talking about, they're not talking about hanging. They're talking about him hanging on a wooden cross and no bones would be broken. And now this is before the cross was even invented as a form of crucifixion, that this was written hundreds of years before the Roman Empire even existed and invented crucifixion. But it's important to remember that when Jesus says, take up your cross, he's talking about denying self. Another way to put that is dying to self, not just denying what you want, but dying to what you want. Your desires are no longer the number one thing you're focused on. So he's talking about daily surrender, but to who? To what? To God. Daily surrender to what God wants for your life, not what you want for your life. I remember when my wife and I first got married, we were at a small church, and this church had some problems, and the pastor, we got to be really close with him and his wife. They were a younger couple and with a couple young kids, and we didn't know anybody else at this community we moved to a little ways away from where we were from. At some point, this group of leadership, a few people, not the majority of the church, a small group of people decided they were going to oust the pastor. They were done with him. They wanted me to stay, but they wanted him gone. I did not agree with the way that went down, but he decided he was going to go to the next town over and he was going to start a new church. And he asked me to come with him. And I was like, well, how would that work? Like, money's not the most important thing to my wife and I, but she's a teacher and a coach with a house payment and a car payment. I do have to get a salary. He's like, oh, there'd be no money for at least 6 months, no salaries. And I was like, well, I'm out. Count me out. I'm can't do that. Around the same time, I had a friend of mine and my wife's who knew us, who was a pastor at a church down the Texas coast. And he called and he said, look, I want you to come and do youth and music. The two things he knew I was passionate about. I love play guitar and leading music, more contemporary style and stuff with a band. And he said, I've heard you do that. I want y'all to come and do this. School board members are all of them are go to our church. The superintendent goes to our church. We'll find your wife a job too. Y'all can come down here. He told me the number he's going to pay me, that the church would pay. And I was like, that's way more than what I'm making now and way more than the zero I would make at this other church. And so I was like, okay, that's what we're doing. So I did a couple of phone interviews with the committee and with him and leadership of that church. And the whole time my friend is asking me, you sure you don't want to just do this brand new church with me with no money? And I was like, yeah, pretty sure. And towards the end of the process where they're fixing to, like a couple of days, they're going to vote to hire me and I'm going to have to move and all that stuff. My friend comes and he says, hey, will you at least pray about it and consider it? And I was like, Okay, I'll pray about it. Well, for that week before, leading up to when I've got to make this decision, the deadline to make a decision, I really felt convicted. Maybe I should stay here. And I was like, I can't. It doesn't make sense. I can't. And so reading through the Bible one morning, I said, God, please show me what to do. And finally, I said, I'll do whatever you want. And finally, through prayer and reading the Bible, I just stopped and I said, God, whatever you want me to do, that's what my wife and I will do. Money doesn't matter. We just want to be where you want us to be. And oh my goodness, immediately I got a peace about staying and moving to doing this church plant with no money. And I felt really not at peace with going to the church with more money on the coast by the beach. I don't know how to explain it. So I called the guy from the coast and I said, I'm sorry, I feel like God's telling us to stay here. And I called my wife and I said, I feel like God's telling us to stay here. And she goes, that's not what I want. I know that's not what you want, but if that's what God wants, that's what we'll do. And to be honest, that's the first time in a couple of weeks that I had a peace about anything was that night because I'd surrendered to God. And you know what? God really blessed us in that time of ministry with relationships with students and adults and people that we can still look to today and say, that was a great time in ministry. And we grew a lot. We grew closer to each other with not having a salary for a while, had to do some other things and learned how to really trust God. And he provided for us for all of our bills. He took care of us. And so we learned to trust him. We learned to be closer to each other and learned how to do the hard work of growing a church from scratch. And that was a great time in our lives. You know, a practical way to look at this of daily surrender to God, start with a morning prayer and scripture before making any decisions. Just say, God, I give today to you. I give my decisions to you. Guide me. I want to surrender to you today, to your will for my life, not my will. Habit number 2, servant first leadership. In Mark 10:45, Jesus said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You know, true authority comes from humility and serving others, not because you got a name on your shirt. We all know people who have rank, who have title, that we look and say, I'm not sure they deserve that. Listen, earn it, deserve it. When you're a servant leader, when you serve people first, you earn the right to have that rank. You earn the right to have that title, to have that authority. I remember when I started at Sherman Fire Department, the department I work at in North Texas, I remember there was a captain, and the guys that I work with will know exactly what I'm talking about. His name was Jesse. And Jesse was one of the more senior captains, and he had a couple of senior engineers on his crew. And I remember one of the first times I went, the rookie's job is to do all the cleaning, to do the dishes, cook the food, clean the station, mop the bay, clean the equipment. That was their job. So I go out there ready to do my job. I kind of like to sneak around if guys took a nap or if they were in their room studying, doing whatever. I would kind of like to sneak out to the bay and clean equipment, and sneak into the kitchen and clean stuff, sneak into the bathroom and clean quietly. I remember we went on a call and we came back and they were washing equipment and they were mopping the bay, and it was the captain and these 2 senior engineers. And I was like, what are they doing? And the other firefighter I was with, who'd been there a while, was like, oh, that's them. You won't get to do chores at this station. Like, it won't happen. They will have it done whenever you're gone. And we'll go on calls and they'll be here and they will do it and you won't get to do it. And I remember being like, well, that's my job. Like, that's how I'll make an impression. And he's like, I know, but that's how they make an impression on us. And that always stuck with me, that they were willing to do the stuff that not even just the firefighters did, that the rookies did. They had rookies and they were going to be grading the rookies on stuff. And they're like, we can't grade him on it if we're not willing to do it ourselves. That always made an impression to me. Look for one way each day to serve, and not serve for recognition, but to serve without recognition. Look for a way to serve just to serve. Focus on servant first leadership. Habit number 3, integrity in the small things. In Luke 16:10, Jesus talks about that those who are faithful with little will also be entrusted with much. I remember when we were building our house, we've been in about 12 years, and I did a lot of the work myself, and I did a lot of the electrical stuff, and some of it I knew how to do, and some of it I wasn't sure how to do. So I had the pastor that I work with, Cody. He and his wife have become more like family to Melissa and I over the years, and we've done a lot of things with them. We've been on trips with them and worked with them. And I remember asking him at the beginning, like, some advice, like, hey, I'm doing electrical stuff, because he'd done construction with his father-in-law for years and years and knew how to do a lot of things. And I was like, hey, I'm working on this, and what's the best way to do this? And he's like, oh, I'll just come help you. And I was like, hey, oh, you don't have to do that. He's like, no, I'll come help you. Call me. I'll come help you. So I got to a point where I did need help, and I called him, and man, he was there. He showed up. He helped me on some of the things that I didn't know how to do myself, and he was always there. And I contrast that with me sometimes, especially with my wife. She'll ask me, hey, will you do this? And I don't know if it's selective hearing, if I'm just a man, if I'm stubborn, if I'm not smart, if I don't hear, or if I only hear what I want to hear. Because there's times where I don't do what she's asked me to do. And that's not who I want to be. And I'm working on that. I started making lists and trying to be better at remembering the things and fulfilling things that I say that she asked me to do, and things that I promise I will do. Because I want to be a person of integrity in the small things. Practical way to look at this is keep promises, even when it's inconvenient. If you want to be a godly leader, you have to be a person of your word. Have integrity, even in the small things. Habit number 4, listen before leading. James 1:19 says to be quick to listen and slow to speak. I've got myself in trouble quite a few times. If you haven't noticed from the listening to the podcast, or if you've ever met me, I can be a talker and I can talk for a long time. That's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a talker. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the gift of gab or anything like that. But it has got me in trouble before, because there's been times instead of being quick to listen and slow to speak, I've been the opposite. I've been quick to speak and slow to listen. Wise leaders pause, they listen, they seek wise counsel, they wait on God. Recently, my son this year turned 16 and started driving. So I had a truck that I've had 14 or 15 years, been paid off, no problems. It runs good. And we financially could get it something else. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to have another payment. And we got my wife a newer car because hers was acting up. And so had one payment after not having any payments for a couple of years. And so I was like, man, I'm going to have to get him something. He's going to have to drive. We got to get him something. So I was like, well, we'll give him my old truck and I'm going to go get a beater Jeep or something. I'm just going to go get something that I can drive for a couple of years till he goes off to college. We'll do something else then, but just drop some cash and get this. Well, and this went over a couple of months. I was shopping online, looking at things, and my wife is really smart at money. She's better than I am with it, and she's good at math, and I'm not. I haven't had a math class since college, and it wasn't a real math class. The professor had a jester hat on with bells jingling when he came into the room. So that should tell you it's probably not a real math class, or a very difficult one. And that's the only one I had was statistics all the way through for my degree. And so my wife, I came home one day and I told her my idea. Let's just do this. And I've been I already decided this is what we're going to do for a couple of months, but I just didn't mention it to her. So I come home and I tell her about it. And she's like, well, is that the most financially smart decision? I was like, probably, yeah. Well, I went on shift, my 24-hour shift. I came back. She'd written out this like spreadsheet of 2 or 3 options. And she's like, the most fiscally responsible option is for us to just buy this other vehicle, buy a newer vehicle, because the interest rate's lower than what we're making in our savings account. We're going to make more money by doing this versus spending all this cash, because our interest in our savings more than what the interest on the vehicle payment is going to be. And I was just like, okay, that sounds good. Whatever. You're smarter with that stuff than me. So whatever, that's fine. But you know what happened? You know what I realized? If I would have just went to her 3 months ago, I wouldn't have spent 3 months shopping for something that wasn't the best decision for us. But I didn't do that. I had it in my mind what my idea was, instead of going to her and saying, what do you think? And her saying, oh, well, let's not do that. This is better. It would have saved us a lot of time. But I didn't do that. You know, we need to pray before responding, and we need to invite feedback from others. We need to listen before leading. You have people in your life who give godly advice, who you know you can go to anytime and ask their opinion, and know that they'll give you good advice, solid advice, godly advice. You need that in your life, and you need to listen before leading. Habit number 5, multiplying others. 2 Timothy 2:2 says that we need to pass truth on to faithful people who can teach others. That's speaking about God's truth, but I think that's anything. We need to be purposefully identifying people and training people and teaching people who can take our place one day, and not even take your place, but teaching and training them to be doing your job. In the fire service, I need to be teaching and training new guys and new people that come into my station. I need to be teaching them, training them to the level that I expect and the level that we expect as a department. In the church, I need to be training young disciples. I work with students, so I need to be training these students how to follow Jesus. There's going to be a time when they're not under the shelter or the wings or the roof or whatever you want to say of their parents, of me, of this local church, anywhere else. They're going to go off to college. They're going to go get jobs. They're going to get married and have kids and be making decisions and have freedom to do that on their own. And if they're not trained how to make those decisions and make wise decisions and godly decisions and know where to seek godly counsel on all those things, then they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle in their faith. They're going to struggle to be successful. And we have to be willing to multiply others. And that takes work. Investing in people is not easy. It's difficult. But man, is it worthwhile. It's so worthwhile. Godly leaders don't just build followers. They build future leaders. I've had quite a few godly leaders in my life, and they're people that I've worked with. I have pastors that I've worked with and that have trained me, some of whom have been on the podcast. I've had Morgan, Cody, David that works on staff with us at our church now, Rodney, Aaron, Kevin, several people who I could name who are godly leaders. And here lately, I've got in the fire service, I've had several. I've had Jesse, who I've actually got to know more since he retired from the fire service than when I served with him. But several little nuggets of wisdom he's given me are things that I still quote to people all the time. Now, Chief Hopkins, that was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I've had some long conversations with him and just really gleaned a lot of information from him about leadership and about being a godly leader. But you can read all these books and you can get invested in by all these other people, and you need that. We need to have that as a leader. But you're doing a real disservice to your organization, to the world, really, to your faith if you're a believer, to not mentor someone else and pass those things on, to pass on what you've learned. So find someone to mentor you, but also find some people to mentor, some people to invest in, some people to lead. You need to be multiplying others on a daily basis. That's habit number 5. So to recap, daily surrender, servant first leadership, integrity in the small things, listening before leading, multiplying others. Pick one of these habits to live out intentionally this week and start steps to building other godly leaders. Thank you for joining us today on the Called to Lead podcast. If you would, subscribe, like, share so that more people can hear these stories and this content. We'll see you next time on Called to Lead.